Okay, here's your short video presentation on education and Richard Rodriguez and Rodolfo Anaya reading sections, as well as the film clips from the movie Stand and Deliver. I'll give you just a little bit of background information since we didn't see the whole movie. The 1988 film starring Edward James Olmos as Jaime Escalante is based on the true story of an East LA school in the early 1980s where a teacher, Mr. Escalante, began teaching his Latino students calculus and other advanced mathematics so that they could take the AP credit exam for college credit. And the film documents the first time that he does this, and he's met by opposition from his own teachers, by his students, his students' parents, and by basically everybody who says that they have no future and they shouldn't be learning these high-level math skills, because not only will they not be able to learn them, but they have no hope for going on to college or doing anything else that would necessitate those types of skills. So he goes on to teach them through a variety of unorthodox ways. You see the apple in the classroom. You see the communal board work and everything that is meant to really show his dedication and his fostering of these students, and they ultimately pass the AP exam, and the end of the movie in fact shows you statistics that indicate that the classes that would come after these would also go on to achieve very high success in this area. The film really concentrates on the Latino neighborhood and the family being a part of these young high school students' community outside of the school system, and shows the audience the consequences that may be available should these students drop out of school or simply slough their way through school, etc. So this is a good example of showing, and this was an early 80s story told from a late 80s perspective. This is a good example of the way that education has begun to change in the minds of Latinos in the United States, primarily in how one's parents and previous generations see education, where it is done. Is it done in the school, or is it done at home? Is it conducive to the parents to support their children's education, or do their children need to support the family more by working in the family restaurant, which is a scene from the movie that we didn't see, or from helping take care of the kids because they're working double shifts, which is also a scene that we didn't see. The strain between what they see as everyday life and the role of education is really hard to update. Moving on to the general nature of education, when talking about Latinos and education in the United States over the last part of the 20th century and into the 21st, there are four major players that we need to always consider. There's four, and these are included in your notes there. I'm going to list them, and then I'm going to go back and talk about each of them. First one, in terms of education, is the students. Who are the students, and how will we address them? Second in this line is the parents of these students. Third are the teachers. And the fourth component, the fourth player, is curriculum. Okay, each of these has its own part to play when discussing where we need to look at education and Latinos. Students, of course, are heterogeneous in terms of cultural expectations and cultural background. Some of these students are going to be coming from different class systems, but a majority of them are coming from manual labor families and may have to work themselves in addition to going to school, whether we're talking elementary school, secondary education, or even on into higher education. Students' makeup will be largely an indicator of their background and their previous relationships with school, and whether they speak the language or whether they're English language learners. All of these things are components tied directly to the student, and their role will be integral in terms of how we talk about education. Second are the parents, and the parents provide a key to understanding the prior generation, and the parents oftentimes have an education valued as different in their own generation than their children are experiencing. If they are first generation or second generation immigrants to the country, you can see how their relationship with the schooling system may be different from the relationship that their child has. Again, culture is heterogeneous, so to say that all the parents have achieved this certain limited schooling is inaccurate, but to say that there are a spectrum of different parental educational experiences would be more accurate. And again, going back to the idea that majority or a good majority of Latinos experiencing manual labor class will have parents who may work irregular shifts, third shift or overnight shifts, which might hinder parents from becoming involved in their students' extracurricular activities, meeting with teachers, homeschool associations, those types of things that could further the educational experience of their student. The third thing on the list is the teachers. How are teachers being trained to deal with culturally diverse populations? Language learners are probably the most obvious way of noticing difference, but also biculturalism, understanding how things work in multiple cultures is tantamount in educating our teachers these days, and most higher education institutions are integrating certain cultural sensitivities and cultural educational models into their curriculums for teachers to be considerate of these things going forward. But this is not always the case, and for teachers to understand those issues with parents and with students that don't necessarily translate from culture to culture. And Latinos might have a particular issue with speaking with authority. If parents are called into the teacher to discuss an issue, this might be seen as threatening rather than conversational, etc. All of these things, the teacher has to have some ability to recognize the way that the culture and language and ethnicity, among other things, might play a difference in terms of their relationship with the student and the parents. And then the last thing on the list is curriculum. What is being taught? How is it being taught? We talk about cultural bias and cultural centric lessons and the ways in which the curriculums at school might reflect content that is not always diverse and reflective of a widespread population, as well as the curriculum being delivered in dual language programs. This is something that is very current, in fact, and regional in terms of our Omaha school districts. Are these things feasible? Are they manageable? What are the philosophies of teaching in dual language and bilingual educational programs? Does the curriculum need to be updated? Are we talking history and sociological practices and cultural studies that are up to date and reflect cultural sensitivity and all of those things? So students, parents, teachers, curriculum all need to be figured into any discussion where we talk about Latinos and the importance of education. A couple of obstacles that might get in the way in terms of parent involvement. We indicated just a minute ago that parent involvement increases the chances for student success. Parents' knowledge of things like tutoring programs and after-school programs and extracurricular activities that might elevate a student's social skills, etc. All of these things will help that student on both an academic and a social level. Obstacles in place, obviously language is primarily the first one. It might be a certain power dynamic at play when the child speaks more English than the parent does. If the child is constantly needing to translate for the parent, there's an authority that gets lost in that. The second is culture. In many Latino countries, education is seen to be solely the responsibility of the schools and the teachers and their roles from the home, whether that be homework or student-centered discussions around the dinner table. All of that will be deemed as unnecessary because education does not occur in the home, it occurs at the school. The third thing on that list is the parents' own education. What value and what experience have they had with education? And that's going to be passed on to their child, consciously or subconsciously. So that comes into, and then also this fifth catch-all term for a general misunderstanding. Communication between home and school often might represent such messages as danger and threat coming from an authorized voice to a family who may have precarious legal statuses or may know families who have precarious legal residence statuses, all sorts of things that might suggest an adversarial relationship versus a beneficial relationship. One of the other things, and I've got this highlighted a little bit lower on my notes there, that parents and students who are English language learners as well have to deal with this, a thing called institutional literacy. And we tend to think of language as being just English, Spanish, or other languages. But within each of those languages, there are certain other languages, literacies that must be learned in order to operate within a certain system, an institution. Every institution has a literacy and a language that must be learned in order to negotiate that system. Driver's license obtaining has a specific language. Registering for your college classes, you must understand a certain amount of that language. And I don't mean just English or Spanish. I mean where to go, who to talk to, what to do next, all of those things. Schools provide a tremendous amount of institutional literacy, and other places as well, that might inhibit some parents from becoming more aware and more involved in their own child's educational career. This is sort of highlighting one of the other obstacles that is on there. I'm going to skip ahead to understanding the fictional piece we read from Rodolfo Anaya. This is a section of his 1972 novel, it's fiction, called Bless Mi Ultima, which is based almost autobiographically on his young life. It's kind of a fantastical treatment of his own experiences growing up in New Mexico. But as I mentioned in the summary, in the email summary, this novel comes out in 1972. Anaya is writing about a young boy who is going to be going to school very soon, and he has pressure coming from his father's side and his mother's sides about what he will be in his life. His mother desires that he will grow up to be a priest, a holy man. His father desires that he will grow up to be a man of the llano, a vaquero, a man who rides the land and is free. And in the middle of this is this character by the name of Ultima, or La Grande, who is a curandera. Curandera is a spiritual healing woman who uses herbs and prayers and other home remedies to cure illness and sickness and maybe evil spirits that people may be inhabited by in Mexico and in the southern regions of the United States. And Anaya uses this character Ultima to represent the unknown future of the young boy Antonio. What will he do? How will his education be laid out for the remaining part of his life? Only Ultima will know. She is the ultimate, no pun intended, judge of where his life will go. Well, education in this section is put out there as both an awakening in the sort of sincere sense that one's education can free your mind, but then also it's put out there as an enlightened sort of experience, almost like a sin. In early scenes of his novel, Antonio witnesses a man get murdered because he murdered somebody else, and the posse forms, and he follows them, and he sees this man murdered very close to him in the middle of the night, and this is supposed to symbolize his quote-unquote education, his loss of innocence, and he experiences the world and what it has to offer, and it is scary to him. And so education begins to waver as this way for him to grow, but then also to be disillusioned. And by the time, when we only read this first part of the novel, but by the time we read to the end of the novel, and we learn that Antonio will follow in Ultima's footsteps and become not a priest or a wandering man, but a sort of spiritually connected man who is both enlightened and prayerful and powerful in those sort of ways. And he has gathered sort of an active role in terms of educating himself. Richard Rodriguez, on the other hand, is a nonfiction piece based on his life growing up in San Francisco. He was born in 1944. This piece comes from his memoir, which is a writing directly about his life called Hunger of Memory. And he's writing about his young educational life in a different way than Anaya is. His main idea is that as a young Latino, he wanted to succeed, and he wanted to educate himself and to be able to better himself. And he saw this from an early age as being the result of recognizing a public world which he went out into every day when he went out the door, and he acted a certain way and spoke a certain language and promoted his education one way. And then he had his private world, which when he got home, he was a very different individual. And being able to separate those two worlds, in his mind, is what gives him a path to clear academic success. This is mildly, or in some circles, sort of severely controversial in terms of Rodriguez's later statements that abandoning, quote-unquote, or adapting past or moving beyond his simple, poor Latino roots and his parents is what gives him his only route to success. Yeah, that's a understandably controversial position among some Latinos, feeling that Rodriguez may be seen as sort of assimilating in spite of his humble roots, and that's not a popular opinion to hold. Rodriguez also has gone on the record as being anti-bilingual education and anti-affirmative action, stating in both cases that they do a disservice to minorities in not pushing for full-on assimilation and adaptation. And so he, in this part that we read, he clings mightily to this idea of what he calls the scholarship boy, the boy who always knew the answers and who could recite the textbook and give the teacher exactly what they wanted to hear, mostly because he was smart, he was adept, but also because he felt the need to prove his worth, the fact that he was not a boy who had been given chances simply because he was minority. Along the way, in terms of talking about his education, he says that his father and mother were not able to help him, and he really begins to see this change in his life of his own doing. And right or wrong, he feels a need to push himself more prominently into that public world and to move beyond his ties to familial private world. And while he ultimately achieves a very high level of academic success, readers might question at what cost. Is it correct to believe that one can erase and move beyond one's past in a way that better determines who they will become? Is that the most correct way to do that? So Rodriguez comes across as being pro-assimilation and full-on integration into the educational system, while disregarding the need to change any of the efforts of curriculum like bilingual or bicultural education, and certainly himself as a student and then future teacher would begin to promote that sort of mindset as well. So education is an important arena in which to talk about Latinos in the contemporary world. Understanding the value of education has become important. You're all in this class, so you certainly value higher education, whether you're Latino or not. Parental influence over these decisions is probably varied amongst all the students, but certainly plays some role, whether you are modeling your parents who have higher education degrees or whether you are working at the behest of their regrets, parents who maybe didn't graduate high school, or etc., or some combination of those things, or both. Education represents empowerment, and amongst Latinos, as amongst all people, the recognition to get in and be represented, whether it be through students, those of you who are Latinos are our students, teachers, like myself and other Latino faculty members, and high school teachers and primary school teachers as well, and curriculum. Courses like this one, and advanced courses in Latino studies and diverse cultures and language studies and cultural depictions. All of those help to sort of stimulate the growth of education. And as we train future teachers, teachers who come in contact with courses like this one and others will no doubt be able to apply things that they've learned towards teaching the next generation of students.